Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Elohim.
If you were in the last 6-day study I did, which it would have been Genesis 9, you'll remember that we began by asking ourselves a series of questions. What, where, when, why, and how. And we're going to do that again this evening. So, what in this case is going to be Genesis 14. This is what we will be looking at this evening. And if you are labeling your chapters and or for notation purposes, this chapter is generally labeled as the War of Kings / Melchizedek. Now, where is the plain of Mamre and Hebron? If we look at Genesis 13:18, it says, Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto Yah. Now, to answer when, we have to do a little bit of work. So the flood, it ends around 1,657 years after Yahuwah creates Adam or after creation. And the script tells us that Arphaxad was born that following year. Genesis 11:10 says, These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. Now, as you continue down with the genealogy of Shem in Genesis 11, you will get various names and births on down to Abram in Genesis 11:26. And it says, And Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So here we see that Abram was born to Terah when Terah was 70 years old, or was he? Let's look at Acts 7. And in Acts 7, Stephen is speaking, and in verse 4 he says, Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land, wherein ye now dwell. So Abram does not leave Haran until his father Terah died. And if we look at Genesis 12:4, we see it says, Abram departed as Yah had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. All right, so here we see Abram 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And if we look at 1132, we find out that the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, if we subtract Abram's age when he left Haran from Terah's age at his death, we find out that Abram was actually born to Terah when Terah was 130 years old. So why does Genesis 11:26 says that Abram was born to Terah when he was 70 years old? Now, I'm not 100% sure, but my suspicion is that 70 years old is when Terah began to father children. And what we see listed in conjunction with that are those children that are pertinent to the Bible's narrative. Now, we still need to answer when. Let's look at Genesis 16:16, and here we get another clue. It says Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. So this is actually the next timestamp that we would get, telling us that Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael or Yishmael was born. So this gives us an 11-year window to when the events of Genesis 14 takes place. Now, I'm not going to do all the math with you, but I will tell you that Abram leaves Haran 2,083 years after Adam was created. Now, with this particular story and an instance, the answers to why and how, they're pretty much the same answer. Let's look at Genesis 13, 7 through 12. And it says, "And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Yarden, that it was well watered everywhere, before Yah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yah, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom." So the answer to why Abram is where he is at the start of Genesis 14 and how he got there is because of the strife between his and Lot's herdsmen and the decision that Abram gave unto Lot. So tonight we will be in Genesis 14. And this chapter is, for the most part, it's glossed over. Most of us, we get drawn into the mentioning of Melchizedek and we focus on that. But that's pretty much it. And I believe the reason for this is because this chapter is sandwiched between two pivotal chapters: Abram and Lot separating in chapter 13, and Yah speaking to Abram in chapter 15. But to me, it's much, much more, and it contains much, much more. This is why sometimes when I study, I begin laying it out as I've just done with you. Now, as we go on, we will see if and how that information can help us in our studies. Now, before we move on and begin, I do want to draw your attention to something. In a few chapters, we will get to the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. When we do arrive there, we will find Lot at the gate of Sodom. The way that chapter begins and describes Lot and his plot, it's as if Lot is simply a resident of the city of Sodom. But look at Genesis 13:11. It says, "Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other." Lot chose all the plain of the Jordan. Okay, now look at verse 12. It says, "Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom." So Lot dwelled in the cities, and he chose all of the plain. So what happened to Lot? Let's pick up in Genesis 14, and we're going to read 1 through 6. "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chederlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinar, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim. and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chederlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Chederlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims and Ashtoreth Karnaim, and the Zuzims and Ham, and the Emims and Shabah Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness.
Shalom, shalom, everyone. I was just about to say, these are the kinds of verses that we kind of skip over because I, for one, have no idea who all of these people are, these places, or anything like that. So, can you expound a little bit on all of that, please?
I'm glad you asked.
So,
So let's go through these locations. And I believe that Netanel, he spoke recently about the Fertile Crescent. And this area that you see on your screen, or this map that you see, the darker green, this, all this here is the upper portion of the Fertile Crescent. It was known in antiquity as Mesopotamia. Now, for reference, the area northeast of Aleppo, and here is Aleppo, this area labeled Wasukani this is the general area of where Haran was located. All right. And in this area, you see two rivers. This river here is the Kabor River or the Habor River. And this river here is a continuation of the Euphrates. Now, this area in between the two rivers, and it extends a little bit, is known as Padan Aram or the tableland. Now, Shinar is this lower portion of the Mesopotamia area. And it really goes from just above Baghdad down here to the Gulf. So this whole bottom area is the area that was known as Shinar. Now, Elasar, which was a name that or an area that we read, it was an area that was situated right here, if you can see my mouse, between and Uruk. And it was a Chaldean stronghold, and it became later known as Larsa. All right, so Elam, that was the area just south and east of Mesopotamia, and its capital or its seat of power was Susa, right? Or better known from the book of Esther as Shushan. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah, they were sister cities, we all know, that were on the southeastern side of the Salt or the Dead Sea. And depending on which map you look at and which historical account you hold fast to, Admah, Zeboiim, and Zoar are relatively close together and in proximity to Sodom and Gomorrah. And a matter of fact, like no matter which map you look at, they're all pretty much either in a line or sometimes they circle around this area depending on who you ask. And even in some maps, you'll see Sodom, like this one, as the northernmost portion. In some maps, you'll see Zeboiim as the northernmost portion. But nevertheless, Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, Admah, and Zeboiim were all in this general area known as the Vale of Siddim. Now, historians in the past, they believe that Amraphel was who we know as Hammurabi. And that belief has in modern times been dismissed because of the dating of the War of the Kings it precedes Hammurabi's rule. So it is now believed that Amraphel was actually the third ruler of the dynasty, and his name was Amar Sin, Amar dash Sim. Now, I don't have enough time to go into extreme details, but from everything I've ever studied and calculated, I would agree with that assessment that it's not Hammurabi, it's more than likely Amar Sin. There isn't enough evidence to figure out for me to tell you definitely who Arioch was. Scholars believe he was Ariaku, or aka Rimsin, who ruled over Larsa, and that's a good possibility. Chederlaomer, as we see many times in the Bible, is not a name, but a title. It is derived from two Elamite slash Akkadian words, Kedor, meaning servant, and Lagamar, which was a female deity of the underworld in Elamite and Babylonian pantheon. And that name, Lagamar, means no mercy in Akkadian. So he's the servant of no mercy. Now, title, or it should actually be pronounced Tudal, and it says he's the king of nations. That word for nations is goyim, from where we get Gentiles. Its root is goy, meaning foreign nation. Tudal is actually a Hebrew rendering of the Hittite word Tudaheliah. Now, the Hittite kingdom, they ruled over much of Anatolia for a time, which was what we know as modern day Turkey, and their empire expanded sometimes northern Syria, northern Iraq, northern Iran, up to Armenia and Azerbaijan. And it is almost certain that Tudal, that we see in Genesis 14, was an early Hittite king, and he would have definitely been a descendant of Japhet. So these four kings, they go out in the 14th year of the five kings of Siddim, servitude to Chederlaomer, and first smite the Rephaims and Ashtoreth Karnaim, the Zuzims and Ham, and the Emim and Shavah Kiriathaim, and then the Horite. Now, all of these places that I just mentioned are in the upper portion of an area that was known as Dan, right around Jordan. Up in that area is where these places, all of these places are located. But what I want to do is I want to revisit Genesis 6:4 briefly. It says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of Elohim came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Now, when we were in Genesis 6, Netanel broke this down for us, and we learned that the word here used for giants was Nephil or Nephilim, and that it truly meant a feller, a tyrant, or a bully. Now, the Gesenius, it tells us that the notion that this word meant giant in English came from the etymology being compared to these Arabic words that you see here, meaning noble or grand, but that the Greek actually gets it correct as it renders it to meaning falling on or attacking. Now, this does not mean that the Nephilim were not grand or tall in stature compared to others during their time. I believe that is totally plausible. What it means is that in true Hebrew form, their name, Nephilim, is based off of their actions and not their appearance. Now, the Eames that we see in Genesis 14, they are all pretty much tied together in a sense. And I will explain, but what I want you to see and notice is that they are technically not tied to an area. They are in a location, but they are not synonymous with that location or that area, at least at this point. Now, if you notice, all the other locations, they have kings. The Horites, it says that Mount Seir is theirs. So they're synonymous with Mount Seir. The Eames are not really tied to the areas that are mentioned here yet. But let's look at Deuteronomy 2 9 through 11. It says, And Yah said unto me, Distress not the Moabites, neither contend with them in battle, for I will not give thee of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar unto the children of Lot for a possession. The Emines dwelt there in times past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim, which were also accounted giants as the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emines. Okay, so we see that the Moabites called the giants in their area Emims, but others may have called them Anakim. And Anakim are simply sons of Anak, who was the son of Arba. Anak and Arba are technically and simply men of renown or men with a shem or name, which is the word that's used for renown in Genesis 6. But let's look at Deuteronomy 2 19 through 20. It says, And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them. For I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot for a possession. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites called them Zamzummim. So the Ammonites called their giants in their area Zumims or Zamzumims, which they are actually one and the same. Now, if you remember, giants in Genesis 6 was Nephilim, a bully or a tyrant. But here, let's go back to 9 through 11. Everywhere you see giants is the word Rapha. We see it here in 11, and we see it here in 20. And this word is actually really Rephaim, not Rapha. But Rephaim, the word Rephaim, it comes from the root word Rapha. Now, what does it mean when I say Yahuwah Rapha?
Rapha is he can heal.
Hallelujah. So exactly, we can see here in the Strongs that Rapha means to mend or to sew or to heal. Now, abstractly, it can mean feeble or weak. Now, if we look in the Jacinius, we find out that the word Rapha, it comes from the sound of a person sewing together rapidly. So Rapha to them was the sound that it would make when one was sewing something together or mending something. Now, Zuzim, it comes from the word zuz or ziz, which means fullness of breast or a moving creature, nomadic, if you would. And e means, it means terror. And it comes from the root, ema, which means an idol. It can also mean fear or dread. And for extra credit, Anakim, it means collar, neck chain, or necklace or length of neck. And here is the point. All of these eames are the same. They're taller than norm, tyrants with long necks, dreadful or terrors, and they're called different names in different cultures. As we saw, the Moabites called the Anakim Emim, and then the Ammonites called them Zuzims, but they were all technically one and the same. When we encounter something or something outside of our normal structure, something that is unknown to us, unknown really doesn't compute for us. So we have to give it a label. If you think Genesis 6 and Noah, you have the sons and more than likely the daughters of Elohim. You have the sons and daughters of men. And those other people with the long necks, well, they're tyrants or bullies. You see the point? So these names are just names that was given to them based on what they did and also based on their stature. Now, lastly, the Horites in Mount Seir. Mount Seir was located in Idumea, which is also modern day Jordan. And this word Horites, it means white bread. It also means troglodyte or cave dweller. And these were people that were labeled as such because of their actions dwelling in caves. We will continue on and read 7 through 13. And they returned and came to En Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the Vale of Siddim, with Chederlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. And the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram.
Shalom, Mark. I just wanted to point out it doesn't say Abram was a Christian, it says Abram was a Hebrew. That's all.
Hallelujah. All praise to the Most High Yah. And I believe this is the first place where it identifies Abram as a Hebrew. All right. So here, the kings of East, they are traveling west on this campaign of destruction. They smite the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emims, the Horites, the Amalekites, and the Amorites. And this essentially cuts off any assistance for the 5 kings. And Siddim, it simply means flats or the flat land. So the kings of Siddim, they come out against the kings of the east, and they are met and they're defeated in the valley. And we are told that there are slime pits in the valley. I guess we're told that as a partial reason for the kings of Siddim's defeat. Now, I've never been to Israel yet, but this area that you see here is the Dead Sea. It is my understanding that this portion of the Dead Sea is very, very, very deep. I believe it's as deep as 13,000 feet. But this area down here is flatlands and it's not as deep and it sometimes floods. And that would explain the terrain and also it being slime pits there. Now, I have read some other information where, and I'm not promoting this, where some people call the Dead Sea sort of like the drain for the earth. And they believe that when the flood occurred, that all of the water that was on the earth drained out through the Dead Sea. Just a useless piece of information for you, but there are people who actually believe that. But the kings of the east, they take all the food and the goods from Siddim and some of the people, to include Lot, Abram's nephew. And we are also told that Abram is dwelling amongst the Amori in the plain of Mamre and Emori, or Amorite. All right. When it tells us in verse 13, it just says that Abram dwelt in the plain of Mamre. It didn't add the Amorite to it. So it makes it appear that it's just a place, which it is a place, but it's also a person. And we see that Mamre is the brother of Eshcol and of Anar, and that all these were confederate. That word is Baal, meaning master, husband, or owner. So these were all confederate, or they ruled or owned areas with Abram. Now, something that we probably rarely ever think about is all of these kings and their respected kingdoms. Abram was more than likely well aware of them and what they were about. Remember, we're dealing with a 10 to 11-year time frame of Abram being in the land, and the kings of Siddim, or the valley, were paying tribute to Chederlaomer for much longer than that. And also, why do they take Lot? To me, we can clearly see who the true bully is here. It is more than likely Chederlaomer, as all these kings were paying tribute to him. And in true Debo bully fashion, when he shows up here, he's going to take what they owe him and then some, whatever he wants. And it just so happens that Lot was there. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, that word is Aki, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. All right, so one thing to note here is the understanding that most things in Hebrew are so named because of the actions they represent. This location that we see here, Hobah, it means hiding place or bosom in Hebrew. And it's interesting to me because I'm wondering who and or what the kings of the East are hiding from. Now, Hobah today is associated with the city of Homs in Syria, and Homs is north of Damascus, sort of a halfway point from Damascus to Aleppo. We saw Aleppo earlier. More than likely, the exact location of where Hobah was is probably lost to us today. We know it was in and or near unto the territory known as Dan, and that's a little bit lower than Damascus. And that place today, Hobah, going off of what we're told in the script, would probably be somewhere in modern day Lebanon, maybe somewhere in the vicinity of Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, and Baalbek. But we also find out that Abram has 318 trained servants with him. And trained means that they were initiated or they had been tried or tested. So this is by no means all of Abram's servants. These are definitely men, but not all the males. So let's just say that the 318 men that are with Abram are married. And let's just say that each of them have one child, which is definitely well below average. That would put the people that are traveling with Abram alone at somewhere around 954 persons. We never think of it like that, do we? We think of Abram and, just a few servants, but it's probably much more than that. To Hebrews, servants are only slaves in title. Really, they are more like adopted family members. They work, live, eat, drink, marry, just like everyone else. The only difference is that they belong to Abram, and that is a mutual benefit for both parties. I would guesstimate that the number of persons that are accompanying Abram is probably well over 1,000 persons, and possibly even closer to 2,000. And that's a low estimate. Now, we also see that Abram divides his forces and smites the enemy forces at night. If you did not know this story and this tactic is one that is taught in military colleges when teaching attack strategies. But before we move on, two things that we never think to ask. And I'm going to extremely lowball this stat. Let's say that Lot had only 1% of what Abram had, which is virtually impossible. That would be 9 or 10 servants. What happened to them? They're not with Lot the next time we see him. Also, look at 2 Peter 2:5. It says, "And Yah spared not the old world, but save Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the unrighteous, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overflow, making them an example unto those that should live unrighteous, and delivered just Lot, vexed with filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds." Now, of course, Lot is called here just or righteous, and I'm not disputing that. But if we look at his life, Lot ended up in a cave with only his 2 daughters. His legacy is that of a man whose wife was turned into salt and being the progenitor of 2 wicked nations. Peter also says this in 1 Peter 4:18. "And if the righteous scarcely be saved or redeemed, where shall the unrighteous and the sinner appear?" Even though Lot is called just, there is a stark contrast between the depravity we see in his life compared to the abundance of Abram's life and his full commitment to Elohim's will.
Shalom. When you talked about the 318 people, it took 318 trained servants with him, trained men. Hebrew numbers all have meanings behind them. And so when you look at the number 310 and 8, and that's the way we would look at it in the Hebrew, it's 310 and 8. They're represented by letters, and the letter is Shin, Yod, Het. And what that means is to destroy by the work of his hand, to separate and divide, as is seen in verse 15. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants. So the actual number that was chosen is very specific. It means destruction. It means the work of Yah's hand, and it means to divide. Shalom.
And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chederlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shavah, which is the king's dale. And a dale is basically the same thing as a vale. It's a valley or a depression. And Melchizedek, king of Shalem or Salem, brought forth bread and wine. And he was the priest of the Most High Elohim or El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High Elohim, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High Elohim, which have delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto Yah, the Most High Elohim, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread, even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. Save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mam, let them take their portion. There are two common theories to the mystery of Melchizedek. One is Yahusha, and the other theory is that it is Shem. So if you don't know, or if you did not know, there are four patriarchal names that we went through that are still alive at this time. It is Arphaxad, Salah, Eber, and Shem. In fact, Shem will live until somewhere around 50 to 60 years after this event. Now, Shem, he becomes a candidate because of the priestly genealogy that we get from Genesis 5. And also the continuance of it at the end of Genesis 11. But if that is the case, this makes Arphaxad, Salah, and Eber candidates as well. Possibly even Nahor, who is also mentioned in Genesis 11, but we have no death date for. Now, the only problem with the Shem theory, or any of the names I just mentioned, comes from the Melchizedek chapter in Hebrews 7. So if we look at Hebrews 7, 1 through 3, it says, For this Melchizedek, king of Shalem, priest of the Most High Elohim, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom Abram gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation, king of righteousness, and after that also king of Shalem, which is king of peace. That's the definition of Melchizedek. Without father, without mother, without descent or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of Elohim, a priest continually. Now, since we know at least the father of all the names I've just mentioned, and the beginning of days of all of them, in my opinion, this eliminates Shem and all of these names as candidates. This is just my opinion. So that leaves Mashiach. But the same can really apply to Mashiach as well, technically. We know his father and mother. We know his beginning of days and his end of days, technically. For the sake of time, I'm going to cut straight to the chase because we would really need to dive deep into all of Hebrews 7, Hebrews 5, Psalms 110, and a lot more to flesh this out. In Hebrews 7:17, which is a direct quotation from Psalms 110, it is speaking of what Yah said to Yahusha, and it reads, "Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." Now, that word after, let's go to Psalms 110, is H1700 Debra, and it means the style or fashion or in the likeness of, a reason, suit, or style. Long story short, it is saying that Yahusha's kingship and priesthood would be forever, not having an end like that of Melchizedek, or in the same way as Melchizedek. Besides, back in Genesis 14, Melchizedek gives Abram bread and wine and blesses him. In my opinion, Melchizedek is a type of and or a foreshadowing of Mashiach. Let's look at John 8:56. It says, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad." This moment in Genesis 14, is this what Yahusha is referring to or alluding to? Don't know. The question I pose to you is, why is Melchizedek coming to greet Abram? And when I say why, I mean why now? The obvious reason is to ordain Abram into the order of Melchizedek. But let me show you something that I saw when I was studying. Yahusha speaks to Abram in Genesis 12. He says, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will shew thee." And Abram, he departs Haran after his father's death. And when he gets in the land, Yahuwah speaks to him again. He says, "Unto thy seed will I give this land." And Abram builds an altar, and because of the famine, he ends up going down into Egypt. Now, two things here. For one, who tells Abram to go to Egypt? Not that it's right or wrong, but we have no indication that this was ordained by Yah. Secondly, if you go back and read that account, you'll notice that Yahuwah does not speak to Abram in Egypt. He plagues Pharaoh's house, and perhaps you can infer that he spoke to Pharaoh, but he never speaks to Abram. So Abram leaves Egypt, goes back to where he has built the altar to Yahuwah, and he has this issue with Lot and his herdsmen. He and Lot get separated, and then Yahuwah speaks to him again and repeats the promise of the land to Abram. It says, "Lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever." We get to chapter 14, and we have this war. And because his nephew Lot was taken, Abram goes after the kings, and he recovers Lot and all the possessions. What this tells me is that Abram's actions were a reactionary response, something most of us would do if faced with the same situation. He did not consult Yah in this matter. He just reacted. Then we get these words in verses 19 and 20. "Blessed be Abram of the Most High Elohim, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High Elohim, which have delivered thine enemies into thy hand." And he gave him tithes of all. Melchizedek comes to inform and remind Abram of who he serves, that Yah is with him. Yah has paved the way for Abram to be successful in his endeavors. And what does Abram get for all of this fighting and toil? bread and wine. All the spoils have gone elsewhere. Why is this important? How does this all factor in? And if you think it doesn't matter, look at the first verse of the next chapter. After these things, the word of Yah came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. Now, we know that in this chapter, in 15, Yahuwah is really going to give Abram understanding of the promise. And lastly, notice that Abram gives the tithes, the tenth, the spoils to Melchizedek, and not to whom it is rightfully due, the king of Sodom. The message and the imageries here are vast. Abram is signaling a declaration to whom he serves, for one, the true king. But notice that this does not seem to bother the king of Sodom one bit. He said unto Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. This is another reason why Melchizedek shows up now. Whether Abram recognizes it or not, this is a pivotal moment in his life, one of many pivotal moments. Or as Yirmiyahu says, the first of many pivotal moments. Just as Melchizedek is a type and a foreshadowing of Mashiach, the king of Sodom is a type and a foreshadowing of the adversary and his ways. Luke 4, 5-8. And the adversary, taking him up into a high mountain, shewed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the adversary said unto him, All this power will I give thee, and the esteem of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. If you therefore will worship me, all shall be thine. And Yahusha answered and said unto him, Get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship Yahuwah thy Elohim, and him only shalt thou serve. Just as Mashiach does not deny the adversary's claims, but makes it abundantly clear whom he serves, Abram, with the king of Sodom, does the same by exclaiming, I have lifted up mine hand unto Yah, the Most High Elohim, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men that went with me. Or Eshcol and Mamre, let them take their portion. Before we close out, I always like to leave with one verse. Revelations 12, and this is one of my favorites, 9-11. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the adversary or the devil, and Hasatan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in Shamayim, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our Elohim and the power of his Mashiach. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our Elohim day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, the wine, and by the word of their testimony, the bread. And they loved not their lives unto the death.